Welcome to Story Chats at Inspi Romance. I am not Elizabeth Madry, the host that you are used to seeing in the chair here. Elizabeth is away for a family emergency today, but I am here with my co-host, Narelle Atkins.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Lynn Blackburn joining us today. Lynn will be talking about her recent book, Never Fall Again. Lynn Blackburn loves writing romantic suspense because her childhood fantasy was to become a spy. But her grown-up reality is that she's a huge chicken and would have been caught on her first mission. I can
also 100%
true. She prefers to live vicariously through her characters and loves putting them into all kinds of terrifying situations while she is sitting at home, safe and sound in her pajamas. Lynn lives in South Carolina with her true love and their 3 children. Thanks for being here with us today, Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
We'd like to kick off today, as we usually do, by asking you to tell us and our listeners a bit about your story.
Okay. Oh, it's so hard to, and you're like, at this time of a book phase, it's tricky because I want to tell it and also be super careful about spoilers. And it's so fun and also terrifying for me because this is the first book in a new series. So I'm insanely excited, but I also don't have that, by the time you get to the second or third book in a series, readers want to know that story and they already know some of those characters and they're excited about it. And this is just brand new, clean slate. And so there's a lot more introductory work that has to happen in the story itself because we're creating this whole new world. And so, but I was so excited because I got to set it in a fictional town. Gossamer Falls is in the mountains of Western North Carolina, which is where I'm from. It is not real, and I wish it was real, but it isn't. And I wanted, there's lots of waterfalls in the mountains, and that's one of my favorite things to do is go looking for waterfalls and hiking to waterfalls. And so I wanted to have a waterfall that was kind of the main, a central feature of the town, and that's where it gets its name and all that kind of good stuff. And then when I was thinking about it, it kind of flowed naturally to have 2 kind of rival families in this town who don't necessarily get along very well. It's a low-key feud. There's no violence, but they don't get along and they don't interact much and that kind of thing. One of the families they've both been there for generations, but one of them has a more altruistic approach. They are, they work in the there's nurses and doctors and dentists and pastors and teachers and principals and people who work in the community and that kind of thing. And then the other side, they're trying to bring in tourists and bring in a different kind of, one family's trying to keep things the way it has been and, more protecting their way of life, and the other family's trying to capitalize on their way of life. And so, there's some clashing there. And so it also gives a lot of room for some conflict that has nothing to do with the suspense, just that interpersonal conflict. And when I was planning I usually write 3 books in a series. And so the unifying factor in this series is that all 3 of 2 heroes and 1 heroine are cousins, and they're all part of one family. And then of course at some point there will have to be somebody's got to fall in love with somebody from the other family, or we are not, I can't have it any other way. But that's not for a few more books. So with this one, he's in construction, and he was a Marine, has a degree in construction management, always wanted to move back home and work in his family's construction firm, which is near and dear to me because my grandfather did construction and my great-grandfather was a stonemason. My dad has done construction his whole life while being a pastor. And so I love sawdust. I love the way it smells and that whole idea. So I needed to have somebody who's building things. And he meets this young lady who wants him to build her house. And it turns out that he gets the feeling that she's running from something and he's not sure what it is. And so, of course, she works for the big resort and the wrong family. And so there's that conflict as well. And they don't know what's going on. And as soon as they start interacting, people come after her, and she's obviously in trouble. And so, of course, he has to try to protect her and her daughter. And I've never written a book that had a dog in it. I have a golden retriever in there, and that was so fun.
Mm.
Because I grew up with a golden retriever, and I was like, I need a dog. We need to have a puppy. And so she's fun and adds some fun elements to it. And their main conflict is simply that she's come out of a very abusive situation, and she is not interested in love. She's planning to just hunker down, stay hidden, raise her daughter. And he has some reasons to not be interested as well. And so, of course, then, you throw them together.
Of course you do. As
What
authors
conquers
do.
all, and it all works out. So it's fun. It's a great. I typically write books that I treat mine as an ensemble cast, where I have the hero and the heroine for each book, and it's in their point of view and it's their story.
Right.
But we get a lot of time with the other characters. We meet all of the main characters for the rest of the series at some point. And so it's fun establishing all of that and those relationships. And I'm really excited
as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
I love that aspect of it. I think we're all really just in broad strokes. People want community, and they want to feel like they belong. And so when they can read that in a book, it really is even in a suspense where things are tense, but there's something comforting about having these people who are there for each other and will, are there through them, through thick and thin. And I love that aspect of it. So I'm really, really excited for my readers to actually get to meet them, because with the way publishing, works, I have been hanging out with these folks for close to 2 years now, but my readers have never met them. And so it's a really weird, I've written this book, a novella, and I'm almost done with the next book, but my readers have not met them at all. And so it's a strange kind of place to be. So I'm excited about that.
That makes sense. I indie publish, so there isn't as big a gap, but I do also have my ensemble cast put together before I start book one. I usually go for 6-book series, not always, but usually. And so I know have the setting in the background and stuff, and I know all these people, and I have been also living with them for quite a while before the first book releases, but not quite as long as what you have.
Yeah, mine only come out once a year, so it does make for a long gap.
Yeah. Narelle, do you want to kick us off with the first question?
I will. Yeah. So I loved reading the book, and I also read this quickly. I've had a really good run with romantic suspense. I haven't DNF'd anything, and I've read some really good books. So that's been very exciting, and I did love reading your book. So let's talk about Landry. So she's a single mum, and she's got a 5-year-old daughter, Eliza, which Valerie would have loved because it's a
5-year-olds.
Yes. And so Landry and Eliza, they moved to Gossamer Falls from Arizona with Landry's friend Bronwyn Pierce. And that happens after Landry's husband dies in an accident. So Bronwyn Pierce, there's 3 families. It's the Pierce family, I can't remember now, I haven't written them all down, but there's 3 families that are connected in there. And Bronwyn's the one that has the Haven Resort, where Landry's the artist in residence. So, and Landry's passion is pottery. So basically she's living at the Haven. She's got her pottery studio. That's where Eliza is. Eliza's just starting school. And so she's pretty much forced out of her little comfort zones there, because if your kids go to school, you end up meeting people. So that's just the way it works. So my questions are, at the start of the story, why is it important for Landry to be financially independent? Because as you mentioned in the intro, she's wanting to build a house, and that's how our hero gets introduced into her life. And why does Landry struggle to trust people?
Well, I don't get into a lot of detail. I touch on it though, but when she met her husband and fell in love with him and married him, he turned out to not be anything like what she thought. And then everyone around her really just kept that whole charade going. And she doesn't trust people in the church. She doesn't trust people to be who they say they are because of her experience with her husband. And she felt trapped in her marriage because they were going to use Eliza as a as a bargaining chip, and there were threats made about whether or not they could even, whether she could even, they would try to get custody of her daughter, and those kinds of things. And she didn't have a job, and she didn't have any income while she was married. And so for her, just getting herself into a position where nobody can ever take Eliza from her and have any leg to stand on is super important to her. And having their own place. I mean, it's lovely living at the Haven. It's nice, but she wants to have her own space and be able to do her own thing. And I think a lot of us do. I just think it took her a while to heal and trust enough to be brave enough to even try it. And Bronwyn, who's a Pierce, who's the Haven is the resort, and the Pierces and the Quinns are the two that are mostly in conflict. And Bronwyn had to kind of shove her. It's like shoving the baby bird out of the nest, like make the phone call and go, and gave her seal of approval. Bronwyn is a Pierce, but Cal, Meredith, and Mo are the cousins. They're the Quinn cousins. Cal's last name is actually Shaw because his mother was a Quinn, is a Quinn. And so we have Cal Shaw, Meredith Quinn, and Mo Quinn. And the three of them were all in the same grade. I'm the oldest of 14 grandchildren. My dad's the oldest of 7. I'm the oldest of 14 grandchildren. And I have 4 cousins who were born between April and September of the same year. Yep. And so, it happens. There was a set of twins in there, but still, it does happen. And in this case, with Mo and Meredith, they're only 10 months apart. And so they wound up, because of the timing of it, they wound up in the same grade. And so the 3 of them have been thick and thin, since they were babies. And then same kind of idea. Eliza goes off to school and meets people. Well, the kids went to kindergarten and Bronwyn Pierce was there. And despite the issues with their parents trying to keep them apart, they couldn't stop it. And the 4 of them became close friends and were up until high school. And so Bronwyn, even though there's been issues, Bronwyn trusts Cal, knows that he'll take good care of Landry and he'll be honest with her. And so, she just kind of shoves Landry at him. And it winds up being, it's a tough, I don't have that same experience, but I think anytime you've been betrayed by anyone, family, friends, a church, a community, whatever, it makes you very, very hesitant to trust again. And when you add a child to the mix, it amps up the importance of your just being able to do your due diligence and making sure that this is really safe for them going forward. And that's really where Landry is. And she's very hesitant about taking any risks because it's backfired on her in the past. So
and you handled that aspect of the story well. I'll just add in, you handled it really well. And I think religious abuse is what I would call that, because the church absolutely. And the Bible was, her husband and her in-laws controlled her via religious abuse and twisting the Bible to suit their own ends and basically absolutely. Putting her into an awful situation. And that's really hard for people to overcome. And a lot of people turn their back on God and never overcome those types of situations as well. And I really appreciated Landry's journey in the story because her faith journey is very much a part of it. But Valerie, you were going to say something?
Yeah, it's gone. I think you kind of answered it though, because it's especially hard when it's the church that you want to believe that the church will be there for you, that they will look at you and go, you are an honest person. We know you're a child of God. We believe you. We love you. We'll stand in for you. And when that doesn't happen, that's a whole level of betrayal that people can't equivalent, it's way more than people being mean.
It is. And it's a whole, I don't think it's something that I think a lot of people are dealing with, and they just don't talk about it. They just don't go to church. They're done. They're like, I'm never going back. I'll avoid that situation. I don't even want to risk it again. And it can take a really long time to be willing to take that chance. And it's tricky because we know we're sinners, and we're all sinners, and the church should be a place for all, where we can be safe there. And yet, because we've got a bunch of sinners, at church too, they're going to make mistakes. And sometimes some churches are toxic. It's tragic, but it's true. Some churches are toxic, but they aren't all toxic. And that certainly is not pleasing to God and not what God wants. And so it just was one of those things with her that I was like, she's going to have to really, really wrestle with this and come to terms with being willing to take a chance again, on not so much, not a little bit God, but not even as much God as God's people, and being willing to open herself back up to that.
No, that's really true. Let's talk really briefly about the enclave called the Haven. It's a very exclusive resort that you have to be extremely wealthy to be invited there. So most of the story is set there, and it certainly revolves around the Haven where Landry has her pottery studio. So where did the idea for the Haven come from? And have you had an invitation to an exclusive resort like
I wish. No, well, it was interesting because I'm from the mountains of Western North Carolina, and originally a native. My dad's side of the family has been there for hundreds of years, and it's a challenge because we have a lot of Yankees who move in because it's beautiful. It's not. We still have winter, but it's not as harsh. They love the area, and so it became, when I was a kid, it was always on these like best places to retire kind of things. And what's happened is that people who've lived there forever, they can't afford to buy a piece of property anymore. Land prices have gone up, taxes have gone up, the demographic has changed a good bit. And so when I was thinking about it, I was like, I want to figure out how I can bring this resort feel to the town, but not ruin the town and not completely destroy how they have it set up. And my thought on that was, well, if I made it uber exclusive, private, not the kind of place that's advertising, not the kind of place anybody can just afford to show up, so that it becomes, it actually brings money in and helps the economy of Gossamer Falls, because a lot of people work there, but it doesn't bring in lots and lots and lots of people. So while the Haven itself is exclusive and does bring in a certain type of person, which is mostly very wealthy people, the town of Gossamer Falls itself is kind of able to still truck along very much the way they have been. And that was kind of the idea behind it, was how can I do this? Because it's a real issue in North Carolina, that you bring in all these tourists, and we want tourists, and yet it changes our whole way of life
here too.
And so I was trying to find a way to avoid that. And of course, with the beauty of fiction, I have some options there.
There you go.
But, and also because the Haven has existed really since, prior to social media. So they had already figured out how to get the word out and communicate information about them without the way we would tend to think of things, Facebook and Instagram and all that. Right. So as those things were coming along in my head, that's not in the story written down anywhere, but in my head, it was easy for them to say, we're not allowing that here. Like, we're just not, we can't have that. We're not having video. We're not having all this stuff. And so it has helped keep the I don't want to say riffraff because that's not the right term, but keeping it exclusive and avoiding the influx of people that they really don't want
The
to have in
rubberneckers,
their
the
community.
curious.
Yeah, and the curious and the people who just, and I mean, I live in South Carolina now, and I go up to the mountains too to just relax and have some downtime, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and it's my favorite place. But it is, you can see where for the natives sometimes it's a mixed blessing. So it that was my answer to how I would fix that.
Yeah. Well, the guests at the Haven are looking for privacy, and they're not going to go to town because they're trying to hide. They're wealthy. Many of the celebrities, many are wanting to have a vacation without paparazzi harassing them. So, I mean, that makes perfect sense the way it's set up.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and it's always tricky, when you're starting to think through how can I make this. I mean, yes, it's fiction, but it needs to make sense. It needs to be believable. If as a reader, like you were talking about, your DNF, I don't like this. I don't love it when I'm reading a story and I'm like, I do not buy any of this. Like, I just, there's too many ways we could have worked around it. And so I really tried to get it where it was feasible that it could be this way.
Well, you very successfully did it.
Thank you.
We've got one question from Beth. You kind of answered it part way about the family feud. And but she said, basically, this feels like a setup for more than just a trilogy. And you've kind of alluded to that as well. How many books will we get? And can you tell us who's next?
Well, for right now, 3 novels and 1 novella. Okay. There may be another novella, maybe, but that's a very big maybe. My husband would say no more novellas. He's like, when are you doing another one? Because didn't we just have a deadline? Because I have a deadline in March, but I had a novella deadline in November. And so he's like, didn't we just have a deadline? Like, well, yes, but that was short.
Deadlines are life.
This is why, yes. But the current plan is the novella that will come out in, I think it's either October or November of this year.
Okay.
And that one is in a collection with Lynette Easton and Natalie Walters. Okay. And we have a title that I can't say. And we have we've seen the cover, but we can't show it yet. But we're super excited about it. We did this 2 years ago with Targeted, was our novella collection that we did. The novellas in that collection are not connected to each other, but they are connected to our own series.
Cool.
So so this one will be a Gossamer Falls novella. And then the next book is Meredith and Gray. So Meredith Quinn is the heroine of this next book. Right. And Gray is the city police chief.
Cool.
So they are the next book. The novella, actually, interestingly enough, which it kind of came out of the blue. I wasn't planning it, but the novella is actually Cassie Quinn. She is their little cousin who is the chef.
Oh, right.
And
yes.
And Donovan, who is a sheriff, a police officer. So she is a little tiny piece in one scene, and you meet Cassie, and there's some conversation about Donovan. And so I've always wanted to write a chef. I thought it would be fun. Cool. And a fun way to connect them, because this is not a spoiler because it's the very first 2 lines. The chef at the exclusive restaurant at the Haven has a heart attack, and they're in desperate need. And so they contact Cassie because she's right there. And so all of a sudden we have a Quinn working at the Haven for a Pierce. It gets very complicated with the family dynamics. But yeah, so it's funny because I was actually talking to my editor today, and I said, I feel like I try very hard to make each book be something that you could read on its own. Right. That you wouldn't be confused, you wouldn't be lost. You could read it on its own. But I really skirt the line between. You are going to miss a little bit if you haven't read the previous books. Not about that specific plot line and that specific story, but more about the connections, like, with the ensemble, more about what's happened before that got them to this point.
Right.
So yeah. There's apparently studies that most of the time I guess a series sales start to drop off after the third, fourth book. Apparently that's not happening. At least it didn't happen with Defend and Protect. My third book in that series is apparently my most popular one so far. And I was like, maybe it's because of the, people are invested by the time they get to that third book couple. There's a lot pulling them into that. So I don't know, but I do enjoy having more of them. I have an idea that the novella part, I've had a lot of feedback where people want to see characters from previous series
Right.
come in. And so if I could figure out a way to write a novella that got some old friends to come visit the new friends, I think that would be a lot of fun. But that's at least a year or so down the road.
It does. I mean,
I love doing that as an indie. I have that freedom to do that.
You have that option. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But Gossamer Falls is such a great setting that you could literally write another 3-book novel in a different part of it, because the Haven only explores a small section. Yeah.
I do have an idea that would let me stay in Gossamer Falls. So then it'll just be a question of, because of my publishing window, so because I publish, typically my books come out once a year, mainly because of my schedule and my life. I have 3 kids and I homeschool, and I can only write so many hours in a day. And so for right now, that's where my schedule is. But it hit me a couple weeks ago that I'm by the end of this year, we'll be thinking about the next series, which is crazy to me when this series is just now starting. That my head is already going to have to shift to another one. But I've really fallen in love with Gossamer Falls, and I'd like to stay. So
I'm sure your readers will probably feel the same way.
Definitely.
Hate to start calling this short, but I think we're going to need to wrap. Is there anything else that you really want your readers to hear, our listeners to hear about your book or your series, Lynn?
Well, the main thing is just that there are some pre-order specials. Baker Bookhouse has 40% off if you pre-order, and free shipping. And we're also doing a free sticker and a free signed book plate. So if you pre-order from Baker Bookhouse, you'll get a couple of little extra goodies. And Baker has this kind of habit, sometimes the books get out a little early. And so the first time that happened, I wasn't prepared for it. And I was like, how did you already get your book? But Baker had already shipped them. So that's always fun. And because I am a tightwad, and so I'm always like, I want you to buy my book. It's great for you to buy my book, but I also want you to get the best possible deal.
Right.
And that one really is the best, between the free shipping and the 40% off and some extra goodies. It really is the best deal. And then the last thing would just be to follow my newsletter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram.
What's your website?
And LynnHBlackburn.com.
Okie dokie. We'll send everybody.
You go to Lynn H. Blackburn. Yeah. And there's a place you can subscribe.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today at Story Chats. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you've read previous books of Lynn's, or if you really love that ensemble cast idea of all these people in the same town, or if you have a feud with your neighbors, please leave a comment on YouTube or on our Facebook page for Story Chats. You can find information about the podcast at inspiromance.com/storychats. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, be sure to fall in love with a good book. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.